Well, hello, guys. Welcome to the first inaugural episode of Duo Dive with Patrick, Trusty Huckster Mercantile. I'm so excited to be joining in on this collaboration with Patrick, and I think it's going to be an excellent addition to our weekly lineup, a great way to learn more about the vintage that you see out in the world. So, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, no, I'm really excited. I think this will be a great, I'm looking forward to doing these going forward. Little weird that the very first one, it's kind of like you interviewing me. So we're not sharing the stage, but we're going to have fun. We're going to hopefully show my collection, and then we'll get into a traditional one next week with a different guest.
Absolutely. So this is so exciting. And tonight we are learning all about vintage punch boards, and Patrick has some, and I found these recently in honor of Patrick, and I'm going to send those to him after the show. So I'm so excited about that. Lots of folks joining in. I want to make sure we make the most of our time, so I'll say a few quick hellos. Peterson is here, and Vinny's excited to see the ones with the pinup girls on it. Brian's coming in. Sam's here. Welcome, Sam. Nate, Mr. Nate from New Zealand, thank you so much for joining. Helen Casey is here. Mr. and Mrs. Berkeley girl, the other Katie. Yay. Sherry Edwards is joining us. Welcome, welcome. Helen, Gabrielle, Angela. Thanks so much, folks, for tuning in tonight. This is just going to be a great episode. And of course, during the show, you can ask questions. So please put them down in the chat. And if you have a question for Patrick, I'll try to get that answered for you. And I think we should go ahead and kick things off, because I want to make sure that we get to everything tonight. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah, I may have a little bit too much, and I tend to talk too much too. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, no, it's always good to learn as much as you can about a particular subject. And I'm fascinated with these. I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about the history of them.
Sure. What I was going to start with is going to show my very first one. And this is a Boots and Saddles game that is actually the only style of this. And I'll talk about styles as I go through the evening. But this happened to be a case where, if you're familiar with my channel, I posted a video probably 3 or 4 months ago. I was doing a shop with me, and I came across this board, and I did not know what these were. I'd never seen anything like it. It has all these little places that look like they've covered with foil that look like, and it talks about being punched. And I did in the video, and even when I was editing it, I'm like, why didn't I buy that? And they were so cool. And it just seemed like such a huckster item, because it's like a little gambling device. So I went home, did a little bit of research, and I thought these were so cool. I immediately went back and bought this, my first one, and then really kind of started filling my collection. And you can see some of them are behind me. And I will just say, these have been built up just over the last few months. They're not hard to come by. So it's one of these cases, so they can get expensive, but they don't always have to be. So there's a lot of different types that you can collect, and I'm kind of refining what I'm building. But for right now, I was going for graphics and being what was kind of cool about them. So I did do a bunch of research, because that's what I like to do, and basically came back to the idea, or where these came from. That happens to be a little bit of a later one. Where these came from was the idea of a trade stimulator. So again, looking for that perfect huckster item. So trade stimulators were something that went back to the 19th century, and I ended up picking up some books. This is one book that really focuses more on trade stimulators as opposed to punch boards, but this is kind of a punch board precursor. And I picked one page that I thought was a good example of what a trade stimulator was. So these were large machines. In some cases, they were slot machines. So there are examples that really are more traditional slots. But when it's a true trade stimulator, the idea was this large machine would go on the counter of a general store, a bar, wherever they would have it. And you probably can't quite read the font, the sign there, but it says, "Try your luck." The idea was you would drop a coin into the machine, and in this particular machine, it was Wrigley's gum. You dropped in 1 cent, and you would get at least 1 cent's worth of Wrigley's gum. So it was still kind of a gambling device, but you were at least guaranteed something. So the traditional trade stimulators were really built from the idea you just wanted to sell more of your stuff. So Wrigley's would either put those into a place, or somebody would buy them. I'm not 100% sure how they were necessarily distributed, but the downside to them, as you can imagine, they're mechanical. So they break down all the time. So there was a gentleman named Charles Brewer who worked for another gum company, not Wrigley's. He worked for Zeno Gum, and they also had vending machines for Zeno Gum. That happens to be one of them. And he kind of came across this idea of trying to convert a trade stimulator into a more portable paper-based item. And the idea came to him by playing a party game where they were drawing pieces of paper out of a hat that, depending on what you pulled, you had to like quack like a duck or just do fun party games. So he decided to take some of that idea of randomly pulling slips of paper out of a bowl and decided to put them into a board. So his first boards, and this happens to be a Charles Brewer board, his first boards were trade stimulator style boards. They have little foil holes that need to be punched. He created a patent which would actually have a place for the little puncher to go. So it's really well embedded. But each manufacturer would have a different style. And before the patent came around, these would get lost all the time. And if you lost it, well, how are we going to punch out the little hole? But you push the punch pin into the front, it pops out the back, a tiny little slip of paper. All of mine are in pristine condition, so I actually don't have any of the tiny little slips of paper, so I may need to break down and, use one of mine. But this is what he moved from the trade stimulator of the gigantic machines into this. So his initial patent for this was in 1905. He issued in 2004. There was already some issue whether this was a gambling item or if it was a legal trade item. It did get approved in 1905 because they changed the wording on the patent that it was for use for providing merchandise. So in the very beginning, these were very much designed to be trade stimulators, not money exchangers, because as they ended up dealing with through the life of their company, Charles Brewer had to deal with whether he was staying on the right side of the law for something like what would be considered gambling. He may have crossed the line a couple of times. There were definitely some lawsuits, but it started in 1905. At this point, even some of the research that I found, no one knows of any existing Zeno Gum trade stimulators that were created between 1905 and 1911. Because in 1911, Wrigley Gum purchased Zeno, so he was out of a job, and that's what drove him to start his own business, creating the actual punch boards. Now, when he created his first company, it was so that was 1911 was when Wrigley bought them out. He started his company called Devon Manufacturing Company, and in 1917 it became Charles A. Brewer Company. And so this is a Charles A. Brewer board. So this at least past 1917, but because this does not guarantee this one happens to be for Easter egg for chocolates. You do not guarantee payment of chocolate. This is going to be a little bit later in the realm of their boards because it didn't guarantee. It's like that gum one that I showed you. Those guaranteed you at least got something. And so that was a little bit later, but I do have, so that was kind of the development of the games. You kind of started with this whole trade stimulator, the idea of put it into a location, receive money to try and move either, sometimes it was cash, but it was more of a credit toward a purchase of some sort, or there were things that these are considered punch cards as opposed to punch boards, but as you can see right on the top, it's no loser. So this was the idea, you got, this what it refers to pieces. So this must have been tied to candy or some sort. A lot of times they were tied to cigarettes. You would, if you had number 5, you got 20 pieces of candy. All other numbers got 1 piece of candy. So you add this range. You were guaranteed something. So just like that Wrigley one that I showed, 1 cent, you would at least get 1 cent's worth of candy. But if you were lucky, you would get even more. And so these, you would punch out the little cardboard. Works kind of the same way. Just a lot less expensive to produce and much easier to ship.
Now, I'm curious about the ones that were early from the Devon Manufacturing Company before he got his sons involved and changed the name. Are those harder to find and more rare?
I will say that I have never come across them. And when I've done some research, a lot of the research that I found was tied to like there's a Made in Chicago museum website tied to the Chicago Historical Society. A lot of these companies did happen to be based in Chicago. No one really explained why that was, but a lot of the companies ended up being local. So I found some sites that were tied to research articles or tied to museums here in the Chicago area. Nobody has one. So the Devon Manufacturing Company, they know from the books, they know that they existed, but I've never seen one come across, and the museums that were hosting them even admitted that they don't have them either. So it's not that they probably don't exist, but you kind of consider in any case, any one of these boards, they were designed to be used because the people would buy this outright. They then had to pay to get this board. Well, they wouldn't get their money back unless they actually used the board. So unless you were getting new old stock, which I'm sure is what some of these are, because I have some that are still sealed. No, the Devon ones are very hard to come by. I'm not going to say they don't exist, but they're not common. So that would definitely be on the lookout. If you see anything that's a trade stimulator from Xeno Gum, because then you're between 1905 and 1911. That's like almost non-existent. And then the Devon would definitely be hard to come by. It would definitely add to its value because it's more rare.
Now, I'm curious about these. What did they do after they were used? Did they throw them away or send them back to the companies?
There was one of the articles that I had found actually had a really interesting, they were plagued with lawsuits throughout the history of this company. And in some cases, they were the ones that triggered the lawsuits. And there was one that they were not getting paid by the person who bought it. And so there's a little bit of an explanation that there was the option you could wait and pay for the board after you collected all of the money that you used to sell the board. So there was the possibility that the boards would not get used and they would get returned. But the idea was they would get paid as they got used. And the more you used it, the more money you would make, because just pulling, this is another trade stimulator style. This was one of the fixed price options. This was promoting a lullaby lamp, but this was actually a monetary gambling item. But this was a fixed price, so it's 5 cents. So you got 5 cents for every hole that got punched on this board. This board has 1,620.
Wow.
Or holes. So the more you punch, the more money you're going to make once you bought the board. And some of what they did, they would actually tell you when they were selling the board, this is why sometimes they got into trouble, because it really did push this out as almost a gambling item. So this is just a little, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit later. This is just a different style of gambling board. But this one you can see right on here. It has 300 holes. This is the style that instead of being a fixed price where you're paying an X number of pennies per punch, depending on what piece of paper you pulled out, you would pay a different amount. So what this is telling you is how many of each type is in the board out of those 300 holes. And if you sell every hole, you'll take in $10 and you'll pay out $5.30. So your profit buying this board was $4.70. So if you didn't finish the board, that just would literally chip away at whatever profit you made, because you didn't get the full intake of the full $10 that you would get if you sold the entire board. So that's why in some cases you will find them completely used. For some reason, somebody held on to it. But you typically will find maybe one or two that were punched, probably because they were tested later. People are like, oh, what's this? But you're either like this one sealed, you're going to find them in new old stock, or somebody went out of business before they were able to do it. So in general, they were going to be destroyed, because if they stopped selling the punches, there was literally no value left.
So then I'm assuming the new old stock ones, especially if they're sealed, are way more valuable than the ones that are punched out.
They can be, and it depends on where you're looking. eBay in general has been phenomenal. I've found so many of mine through eBay, and in general, they tend to be relatively inexpensive, even the new old stock, because in some cases, they're just selling them for the graphics. They don't necessarily know what they are. Where you get into the bigger ticket items is when you're working with specialty book dealers. I've gotten some from Abe Books. I've gotten some from ephemera specialists. they start rating them almost like you would rate currency or you would rate coins, what the condition is, what the rarity is, who manufactured it. So yes, the minute if they're still sealed up, it's just like anything vintage, new old stock will typically add to its value, because in some cases people, they like the idea that no human hands have ever touched this item. Where it gets iffy is something like this. This is technically new old stock, but look how bad the wrapping is. So I have kept it in its wrapping because I don't want this payout guide. I don't want to lose it. But I haven't actually put these on display yet, but I know what I'm going to do with them. I might try and, shrink wrap it or something to kind of just tidy it up a little bit, because I don't like the way it looks. But I did pay a little bit more for this one compared to a similar put and take. This one didn't have the original wrapping. This one did. This was probably about twice as much as this one.
Now, speaking of manufacturers, I know Brewer was the guy that actually kind of invented this whole idea of punch boards. So are his punch boards more prevalent than, say, other manufacturers? Because I knew there was a few other manufacturers that came into being.
He was producing until 1961 was when his company got bought out and changed the name. So he was in production for a very long time. I will say in all of the boards, and I probably have about 24 boards, I only have the one that's Charles A. Brewer, because they are the older ones. They were still producing in the 40s and into the 50s, but they had so many lawsuits. They were issued with a cease and desist order in 1942 that they fought for 4 years. They lost a lawsuit in 1939. So there was a lot of things that were going on that they weren't producing as many. So some of the other companies that came about, I have some from Hamilton. Again, a lot of them are Chicago based. Most people don't know the names. That's what I've discovered, that in general, the values, other than the fact that the Charles A. Brewers are typically older, it doesn't appear that dictates a lot of name. I will say a little side piece, because Charles A. Brewer is considered the father of the punch board. I mean, he literally had the first patent of it. There is a subculture of the boards. It seems to be prevalent in the South that refers to them as Charlie boards. So like I've showed you a punch card, I've showed you a punch board. This is still a punch board. This one, though, happens, you can see, as a Professor Charlie. Charlie boards is a term that kind of became a little subcategory, but they were not manufactured by Charles A. Brewer and Company. They just were called Charlie boards colloquially. And so you will come across those in some cases, but they're not necessarily more valuable. In some cases, they're a little bit cheaper, because unless you know to look for Charlie board, you wouldn't necessarily come across them depending on the search terms. So
are all of the punch boards marked with a manufacturer, or some of them not marked and you don't know who made them?
Some of them are marked. A lot of them are not. In some cases, like this one has a cellophane cover for the key punch. This one does not have the board manufacturer, but in other cases where the cellophane is, instead of cellophane, there's actually a label that's covering the punch, and so that's typically where it will be marked. There were some issues as the companies were being built. There were some issues about quality and where they were being produced. Like one of the many lawsuits against the Brewer Company was for equal. They were outsourcing a lot of their work. Women were placing the little pieces of paper. They were shoving them into the holes. They just felt that was women's work because they had smaller hands. They were more dexterous, but they were doing it at home and they were being paid less money. And so there was a lawsuit that they were actually that they were doing something wrong by doing that. So what ended up happening is some of the companies started putting right on there that they were union made. So in just anything vintage, anything union made, this actually gets a premium price as well. Not necessarily because it's a union made punch board. It's just the fact that it is union made, and there's a very big desire and a very big collecting community that they just like to support the idea of union made, and they want to have things that are union made that say that. So this one happens to be also a Hamilton manufacturing company, and this will affect the value as well. The punch is gone. So even though the punch itself, the board has not been punched, somebody stole the punch. So the fact that there's no punch here, a Hamilton punch would be, I could still use this. If I wanted to use it, I could find another Hamilton punch. But the fact that it's technically not used but missing the punch, that hurts its value. But I picked this one up for Vinny. Not really, but I thought of Vinny when I got it. So you've got this beautiful artwork on here. But this goes into the style or into the concept of, as they were being made, in some cases they were pre-printed. So like the first brewer board that I showed you, there was a label that just said, okay, it's not even specifying what brand of chocolate you're giving. You're just giving chocolate, because if you wanted this, you could sell candy and everyone could use it. This one, if you look really carefully, you can see in all of the white labels, it's handwritten. Now, it's very nice handwriting. Somebody with very good printing wrote that in, but it is written in. It is not printed. So this particular case was either supplied with the white labels in place, or somebody bought the board and maybe what was being promoted was something they didn't offer. So they added something over that and said, well, we're going to use this to sell Bauer's Peanut Crunch. And so they created a customized version. Another one that I picked up, which is a little bit later, it's a really damp. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now I'm interested in the one that you just showed with the pinup girl, and of course the Easter one, because I would assume that these might also go into a cross category of collecting now, because you have people that like vintage holiday and people that like pinup. So how does that affect value?
It kind of becomes, it's not necessarily counterintuitive, but there's kind of like, there become two different graphs as you're starting to check them out. The oldest ones weren't always decorated particularly heavily because they were early graphics. They were, they were kind of a novelty in and of themselves. They didn't feel they needed to put the graphics on there. So when you got into the pinups, you were moving into the 30s. They started realizing, okay, we need to start differentiating the different brands that are out there and trying to make them special. So like I've got it as an example, and these are really hard to come by. I was so excited when I got this because, it's unfortunately one of those cases that the person I bought it from did not know what he had. These have sold for hundreds of dollars online. I paid $5. But this gives an idea of, this is from 1938. It shows some early, well, not the earliest, but it shows some boards, and it shows again what some of the graphics were trying to do. So, this one was focusing on cigarettes. There really wasn't anything other than brand recognition. There wasn't really anything that was drawing attention. That was another one you could customize yourself. This one did have an image on there. As they got later, they needed to do more to customize, but they were smart about it, because depending on your market, different people would like different things. And if you feel this, you would actually recognize this image is actually a separate sticker. You could change just the image of the pinup. And unfortunately, I do not have them, but if you go onto Etsy, there is someone who is selling a lot of just the images. And this is probably the best example because this is one of the images they're selling. This is a little bit later. It's probably getting into the 40s, maybe even the 50s, but same thing. This is an entirely applied graphic. This graphic is available in all different types of pinup. She's fully dressed. Some of them, not so much. So you could customize a lot. So it's very difficult to really pin down prices because in some cases it's the individual pinup that would draw attention, and the same board with a different pinup may not gather as much money, but they were issued at the same time. It's just one person picked one image versus another person picked a different one.
And where did they get the images from? Where they
would get those from the manufacturer.
Okay.
So they could either get them pre-assembled, and say, this is what there were sales reps that were in the field, they got the hucksters out there, basically offering, here's what's available. And they would have their samples to say, do you want, and this one has, I can't remember what it says. This one says right on here, it says, try this. You can see really small text underneath her feet. So she's got a little lasso or a whip, whatever you want to consider. So you would be able to say, I want the hot number jackpot $5 with the try this image. And that's what you would get. But that same hot number could have been issued with, dozens of other images.
Now, were there any famous pinups or pinups artists that worked on these boards?
Not that I've come across. This one to me has a very different style, and I think this one is slightly earlier than that. Definitely earlier than that last one I just showed. I don't know if she necessarily qualifies under the pinup, but she would be definitely that starlet look. To me, she might be somebody. So I don't know if Vinny might even recognize her. She looks like she's trying to replicate a movie star, but I don't know who it is. So there might have been a little, those might have been available, but I have not come across them. And I've not come across certainly anybody's, famous enough that when I saw it, I'm like, oh, I know who that is. So.
And Amy Weaver has a great question. She says she might have missed this, but when did punch cards stop being produced?
If we're colloquially just calling everything a punch board or a punch card, they were pretty much produced into the 60s at some level. One of the things I have happens to be a little bit earlier, but what happened as the gambling became more and more of an issue, and as I move through some of these, I'm starting to show you, it moved away from true trade stimulators and just became straight out gambling. They started producing entertainment style. So this one is the game that gingers up the gang. And there's even the original sales brochure on the back. Now, I think this has some age, but these were being produced into the 50s and into the 60s for children's games. So there would be things that you would punch out the hole, and that would be, it kind of goes back to their origin. You'd punch it out and it might say quack like a duck or walk like a duck, or say something that you're supposed to do at the party. And as this one says, place cuckoo in the center of a circle formed by all players. Each in turn punches out one slip, reads it aloud, and does whatever it says. If a player is not willing to do his stunt, he is cuckoo. When all players have had a turn, start over. So you would kind of alienate people who just didn't want to do what they were told. There were cuckoo for kids, so there was a children's version, there's a grown-up version, there's a fortune teller, tongue twisters, and at the time they're all 25 cents each. So these, even after the lawsuits and after it became very clear these were gambling devices that needed to be regulated, they were still producing them. But they pretty much, like in the 70s, one of the articles I found in the 70s was kind of when that was when the scratch off type lottery tickets. So the novelty of these pretty much wore off and they pretty much died out in the 60s.
Now, we talked about these particularly made for parties, and that's a different type of game. So where were the other ones mainly used? Where would you find them?
A lot of times you'd find them in, you could find them in like a general store, because they would in some cases be marketed for both sexes. I had this one is one of the only ones that I have. What I liked about it is it shows it's promoting a lamp, and it shows a woman reading in bed. But it's the only one that I have that actually still has the feet on it to support it. So this literally would have been a countertop device that they would have set out, and it would have been it would have been in plain view to this one. Again, was a gambling one. So even though it's promoting the lamps, you weren't getting a lamp. You were getting a chance to promote. So this probably would have been in a department store. This could have been in any sort of ladies' boutique. The graphics aren't super pretty, so it could have been in a restaurant or a bar. The bulk of them were in bars, just like you would have nickel slots or slots at bars now. You would have this little subset. And what I found interesting is I have a couple of these. There ended up being one because of the lawsuits. There ended up being several points in time where the government was cracking down on these because they really felt they were illegal, even though technically every time the lawsuit went in place up until 1939, every time a lawsuit took place, the punch boards would win because just the way it was supposed to be done was on the right side of the law. But they recognized they needed to hide them. So one of my favorites, I do not own, this is one of my bolos. This is an ad that I came across, so I know it exists. And I'm sorry, I lost it. It is a punch board that hides in either a cigar box or a candy box. So the idea would be you would have this on the counter in a bar or in a restaurant or in a store. To anybody walking by that's trying to trying to check to see if you're doing illegal gambling, you would have the lid closed and it would just look like it was a box of candy. So they did that was, at some point people had to have caught on to that, but they were sold specifically to keep them hidden. But the other thing they did, which is much more common, this is actually one of my favorites. It has a cover to it. So they could like slide it in a drawer. It just wouldn't be on open display. So you'd have to know that they offered it. But once you had, once you knew, you could play, but it just wasn't sitting out like that big stand. It wasn't sitting out drawing attention. And so this one has this cover. Unfortunately, the cover is not in the best condition, but check this out. So this is getting into a totally different style. Of course, this is a World War II era. So we're going in the middle of all of the lawsuits. So this one is dealing with stamps and bonds. So what probably would have happened is you wouldn't have received $10. You might have either received a $10 savings bond or you might have gotten a $10 credit at the store. But it was a regular punch board. But if you punch that row of numbers, the 13, 113, 213, 313, if you look at that, it says each one receives a seal. So this moved into a different style of game. So the seals then were at the top. So the only way you could open up one of the seals was if you got one of those numbers. So it was kind of like a double level gambling. First, you had to get one of the right numbers, which didn't get you anything in and of itself. Like you can see all the other numbers. If you punched a 7, you got 50 cents. If you punched a 45, you got 25 cents. This one does have this one does have a fixed price. It's 5 cents a play. It's like right underneath where the lid goes. But then if you got one of those numbers, and you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 numbers received a seal. Look how many seals are up there. So the seals paid either $1 or $10. So if you got one of the numbers, you were guaranteed at least $1, but there were only 6 numbers given out, and there was probably only one $10 seal in there. So the odds, just like in Vegas, the odds are always going to be in the favor of the house. But this is a very different style with these seals. This one happens to be a Thomas Walsh manufacturing in Omaha, Nebraska. So that one is a hidden game.
Now, you mentioned during the war that they made that particular one. Did they, during the war, cease production on a lot of these? Because I know a lot of the manufacturers went over to helping the war efforts, like Coca-Cola switched their plant over. So how many of these were really being made during the war?
I did find one article it was talking a lot about Charles Brewer because it was one of the articles written by a museum that had a Brewer item. They did switch a lot of their production and switched a lot of their advertising that they were doing what are they called? Not ration books, but the packages that were going to the soldiers overseas, they were packing those up. So they did change a lot of what they were doing and use some of their manufacturing, just like any manufacturer. In some cases, were forced to change their production to make sure they were supporting the war effort. These probably they continue to produce them to some level. I don't have a lot that are in the war time, but I do have another one. This is take this with a grain of salt as being one of my favorites because I feel that this is fairly unique. A lot of them, again, could be customized. So I think I showed you in the catalog, the punch cards had a big section at the top. You could write it yourself or you could pay to have that printed. This is one that is it's not a one-off. I've seen others of these, but this was something that somebody created, obviously, during World War II, specifically to take a punch at Hitler. I think it's the only thing in my possession that I own in any of my collections that actually has a swastika on it. So it's very much of its time, very much a specific item. Again, unused. It was clearly produced during the war. So I know that they were being manufactured. I just don't know to what extent they trimmed it down.
Now, this is a great question from Love. She was asking, was it legal where it was made, but not legal in other places? Because I'm curious about how they really got away with making these for so long. I know they had lawsuits on and off, but I mean, that spanned a pretty long time before they got completely shut down.
Well, the one lawsuit that they actually triggered that I mentioned, where they actually sued someone for not paying them. So that was where a lot of the verbiage came from to understand how the sales contract worked. It was Charles A. Brewer. So that was in Chicago and Illinois. They had sold it to a location. I can't remember if it was a bar or a store in Alabama. And it didn't give a lot of details of why the individuals in Alabama weren't paying for it. So that part I don't think I know. But it did give the court ruling, and the court ruled this is illegal in Alabama. So they said that the stores that bought these devices did not need to pay because what they purchased was an illegal item. Now, you have a whole other issue that means that store collected money for something they didn't pay for, but that, there's no real record of that. So that was a case that in another state, it definitely was an issue. And it really became more of an issue as they progressed. Like I've got a whole series of the trade stimulator types where you're giving away candies. There was a lot of, you think about, just a lot of the criminalization, what was going on during prohibition in the 30s. People didn't have time to crack down and selling a penny for a chocolate. But when you started getting into $5 prizes, $10 prizes, that was when things started getting a little bit more attention. So they kind of got too popular for their own good. And that's what really got the feds, chasing them down, saying, okay, wait a minute. One of the numbers in one of the articles that I found it was all estimates because it's difficult to get a specifics. But they said prior to World War II, when the 1939 lawsuit kicked in, prior to 1939, there were over 50 million of these boards in circulation in the United States. So it was something like 1 in every 3 adult American had played. It's kind of like what the lottery has become. Like not everyone played it, but they played enough. And so they had to start making the bigger prizes. They had to get people, to participate, and offering them a 5-cent candy wasn't always going to do it.
And I'm sure that's why a lot of the punch boards went to that secretive style, so they could continue to have them in places.
Absolutely. Just because to a certain extent, unless somebody turned you in, what you were trying to hide from was somebody walking in and thinking you're doing something illegal. Particularly during Prohibition, you would end up having a case where they're already going to walk into a bar, making sure you're not selling alcohol. So now if you've got a punch board sitting there too, you're just as a bar owner, you'd be attracting attention you didn't want to have.
Now, Nate has a good question here. He's asking, what is the price range that you typically find these in?
The prices typically are relatively inexpensive. What you get caught by is the shipping, because these are fairly solid, fairly heavy, and they can get rather large. My largest one, well, it's either this one or that first one that I found. You end up shipping something like that. It does cost quite a bit. I've paid as little as $5 per. I just picked up. I bought in bulk, and I was able to negotiate a good price. And pretty much all the individual pieces, the not new old stock, they were all about $5 a piece. The most I've paid for one. Actually, the most I paid for one is actually that first one. Because it was at an antique store, and I went back there and I bought it, and I was happy to pay full price. I paid $27. I was happy to pay full price for it because that was what I wouldn't have known these existed had that vendor not curated their booth in a way to show these. So I'm like, you know what? I could probably find it cheaper online, but then I pay for shipping. So $27. For the ones that I bought online, the most expensive was the World War II one. And this one I paid $20 for. Now, I will say that one was a complete fluke on my behalf. He had posted a huge number of his collection. This was part of the big set that I bought. For whatever reason, when he posted the thumbnail on eBay, this was the thumbnail he posted, closed.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why he did it. I don't know if he didn't realize he did it, because this picture was in there, but the thumbnail, so what you saw when you just search for punch boards, you just saw this. And I think that people didn't realize what it was, because for $20, this I'm sure is worth way, way more.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because it goes into that cross collectability. You've got the Statue of Liberty, you've got a battleship, you've got savings bonds, you've got punch boards, you got everything. So this is probably one of my favorites. It's unfortunately the condition's not great, but I've never seen another one. So the rarity is definitely going to help from that perspective too.
And when you look for these, I'm sure you're looking for a condition, and you're probably checking to make sure, one, none of the punches has been punched out, but also the boards are in good shape.
Yes. I mean, and you can find some with punches. If they're punched at all, that knocks the price down significantly. So it doesn't have to be new old stock. It doesn't have to be sealed. But I'm definitely looking at, and there's definitely there are some issues. I've got too many. Which one do I want to show you? The Professor Charlie one. Unfortunately, this one at some point, somebody hung one of those brackets on the back to it. It was shipped with another one, and that bracket scraped all the way down the front.
Oh, no.
So, unfortunately, when I purchased it, the condition was just great. But then in shipping, it got damaged. And actually, it was this one. You can see it tore the plastic and it gouged the art. This is one I was going to show you earlier because, again, this is one of the new old stock. This is a little bit later. This is probably getting into the 50s. But what I liked about this one is I was talking about how they were customizable. This one actually came with all of the art to customize these boards. So not only could you determine what the prizes were, whether you're going to give away 100 cigarettes, 200 cigarettes, you could also tell how much each punch was going to be. So you could just do a 10-cent punch. You could do a 25-cent punch. So you could customize this board to make as much or as little money as you want, depending on the market that you were in. So unfortunately, it happened. I got a good deal on it. I think I paid $5 for this one. I was fine. I didn't go back. I didn't complain. I was sad, but I felt it was karma balancing itself out a little bit. I got a really good deal on the lot. So got a little damage, but we'll deal with it.
Now, as far as dating these, you just mentioned you figured that one was from the 1950s. I'm assuming that you could look at the companies to see if that tells a date by the time, if you look at the companies, you can find out when they were in business, or are you just judging by the graphics? What's really the best way to date these?
In some cases, I'm having to judge by the graphics. The brighter, the crisper, the printing, that just printing didn't exist in the 20s or the 30s. If you're lucky, some of them do have the manufacturer on the back, but in almost all cases, these were done before, at least the ones that I've come across, most of them were done before 1948. So even if they were in a big city, they're not going to have a zip code. So it's hard. It's it's a little bit older, but it's hard to specifically date it as opposed to if you see that zip code, well, maybe it's between 48 and 63. I have not had a lot of success researching the individual companies. What I think I may have mentioned this before, what I felt that I'm discovering is that most people don't seem to know and or care about the manufacturer unless it's local. So one of the companies that I showed was based in Omaha, Nebraska. Probably in Omaha, there would be a little bit of an extra bump for people there because that might be something that's a local company for them. But in general, they all became almost interchangeable. And in some cases, like the company that bought Charles A. Brewer in 1946, they had been buying boards from Charles A. Brewer prior to that and then reusing their own labels and rebranding them. So Charles A. Brewer was producing their own boards, but in some cases they were white labeling them and just providing the boards that were pre-filled with the paper and selling those to other companies. So then the manufacturers kind of got a little squishy. So it doesn't appear to be a huge impact other than age. It doesn't seem to be a huge difference of who actually manufactured it.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, I'm also curious if any of these were jerry-rigged, because obviously with some gambling involved, there must be some other darker aspects of this where people were going in and jerry-rigging the game so that they would win all the time.
There absolutely were. And that was one of the things, and that was kind of one of the ways that Charles A. Brewer kind of built up their business. And a lot of their advertising pretty much were calling other people out for that. Because they would say, we invented this, but other people have pretty much bastardized it, because what you would be able to do is show one that I haven't shown before. This happens to be, there's a little subculture of, I have 4 that are specifically Easter oriented, and I think they're adorable. So I may have a little Easter collection. I don't even decorate for Easter. But anyway, what would end up happening was, because these were being sent to women to sit there and manually put all of the papers in there. what some people were doing is when they created the board, they would mark the board in some way to indicate which holes had the most valuable papers. And so in some cases, the owners would then, when they purchased the board, they would punch those holes out first, so that as you started playing as a patron, as you started playing, you would never get the most valuable papers because they'd already been removed. The other thing that was happening was there was kind of, again, before it got really standardized, people were rigging their own company's boards, and they would say, okay, I'm going to send this board to the ABC bar, and I'm going to make sure that this hole is the one that has the grand prize. The minute the board went on display, the company would send someone into the bar and punch that hole to make sure that the grand prize went back to the company. So there was a lot, just like there was all kinds of criminalization, in all kinds of industries, it existed here too. And so what Charles A. Brewer started, really focusing on, they guaranteed the effectiveness. They really created that idea with that punch, because in some cases people couldn't get the papers out without destroying them. And then how do you read, what you won if you destroyed the paper? So they really did, even though he invented it, what he built over the decades they were in business was just a refinement that they became the gold standard. They became the name that most people knew and had the highest quality. But again, because they white labeled so much, a lot of manufacturers use the exact same shape board, just with different graphics. So it's hard to say that Charles A. Brewer is worth more, because in some cases the exact same board is available through somebody else.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, Amy has a question I hadn't considered before. She's asking if any of these boards were in Canada.
I do not know. I will say for the ones that I have, but this isn't surprising, the ones that I have, the bulk of them happen to even be from the Midwest. I don't even think I have a New York one. I would assume that they shipped across the border, but they were always kind of like trying to balance that legality line. And I don't know, maybe they may not have. They may have said, you know what, that might be getting into another country's laws. Maybe they didn't want to do that. So I don't know. I apologize. I have not come across anything that says one way or another if they were available in Canada.
Have you come across any Halloween ones? I would assume those would be very valuable if there were.
I have not, but again, remember, I've only been collecting literally for like 3 months. So I've amassed this collection in a very short period of time. So I've basically been looking at, what's available on eBay, Etsy, some private sellers I've been able to find. But for the most part, there's not a lot of active collecting clubs left. And so there's not a lot of information that's saying, well, here's what the market looked like or looks like, and here's all the different types that are available. A couple websites I did, they have shown that. I can't remember seeing any Halloween, but I don't particularly collect Halloween per se, so they may exist and I just didn't notice them. But I certainly have found way more Easter than I've ever found for Halloween or Christmas or any other holiday for that matter. I don't even think, even the Americana ones, they're not 4th of July. That's war. So no, I don't know of any Halloween ones.
Interesting. And Teofane has one more great question for us. He's asking how you display these.
At this point, I don't, but I do have a plan. So right now in my utility room, I'm kind of doing a master plan. I have a Huckster collection, which I've shown on my own channel previously. And that is being laid out on a wall in my utility room. I'm in the process, literally was at the store today trying to get the one that I want. I'm going to be redoing the washer and dryer to be front load. So I'm going to have cabinet space and shelf space above it. So my intention is going to be kind of similar to what I've got behind me, is to lay these out. Like, these would never go together, but the benefit to a lot of these is that the graphics are only at the top. So what's at the bottom is cool with the different colored boards, but the idea will be to actually have shelves that are about 4 inches deep, probably 3 or 4 of them, and then have these lined up along there. And then I've also started a lithographic tin bank collection, which will kind of fit in along the shelves. So I know in my head what it's going to look like, but for right now, they sit in a box. So thanks for asking.
It will be exciting when you get that all together.
Yes, I will definitely be showcasing that once I get to that point.
And we've got about 10 minutes left before we wrap up the show. So I was wondering if you'd like to show us some more styles and talk a little bit about that.
I definitely wanted to go into, I think I covered most. So the trade stimulators moved to the gambling. I pretty much talked about that. There was the fixed gambling versus the variable. I kind of showed these without talking about it. But the concept behind these, this was the put and take. So this one, you didn't know how much you were going to pay at the time you punched the board. So when you punched the board, you get a slip of paper that said you're going to pay between 5 and 10 cents. So if you get a put slip, you had to pay, and then you walked away, you got nothing. But if you could also get a slip that said 5 to $1 and you didn't pay anything. So these were pure gambling. Like this was, you didn't even know what you were going to pay, let alone what you were going to receive. And this again was sold as a put and take board with this. This was Hamilton. I have a lot from Hamilton in Minneapolis. It says right on here, if you do this and you sell as a owner, you sell every punch, you'll make $10. So you've got your profit right on there. And this one does have the punch still in there. So that was the other one was, well, they're similar. Is in some cases you didn't know in some cases you didn't know what you were going to pay. So the variable ones are the ones you didn't know what you were going to pay. So there was just a variable as opposed to put and take. There was just a variable payment option. The other style, and these I've only ever found as punch cards, but these are near and dear to your heart, Katie. I've got Coca-Cola punch cards, but these are a little bit different. And it took me a while to figure these out. So what this one is doing, unlike the other punch cards, like the take a punch for Hitler and that kind of thing, this one has a prize underneath the seal, or the prize is a 6-bottle carton of Coke. And there underneath the seal is a name. So what you would do as an owner, and this would be something that could be done at a party, it could be done at any sort of gathering, you would take the 15 names that are on here and you would find 15 people to take one of the names. But you can see what's different about this one compared to the others is there's like this little list of the names that are on here. You then had to take that person's name. So if I was at a YouTube vintage reseller meetup and you took Agnes and Nate took Blanche and Misty took Clara, I would keep track and I would sell all 15 names. And then once I sold all 15 names, then I would peel off the seal and determine which one of the 15 names wins the 6-bottle carton of Coke. So this was a very different style. So it was a little bit more instant profit for the owner because you couldn't provide the prize until you sold the entire card. And this one's short. This one's only got 15. Check out that one.
Holy moly.
So this one, again, I think this one you would actually pay, if you got the 7-Eleven or 21, you didn't have to pay anything. But otherwise you'd be paying 5 cents. So you can see how big this list is and how much money you would take in just to give out a 24-bottle case of Coke. So, and this one is also still sealed. Now, I do believe this is a little bit later. This might be approaching into the 60s because, again, this would be the feds wouldn't necessarily be going after something. You're only collecting a nickel and you're giving away Coke. So this falls kind of in the trade stimulator categories. But those are the only ones I have, and I've never found a board that does the same thing. It's always the punch cards. But there are... this one I'm going to show because I also learned my lesson. Sometimes they're pieces of boards. This is missing something because this one is a keyboard to the track special, and it says the last sale in each section receives 1 punch in the track special. I don't have the track special. So there's another board that's supposed to go with this one that for some reason has been separated. I don't know how. It doesn't appear to have been cut in half or anything, but there were options just like the seal one for the war. You would do a punch and then you might be able to get a punch in another area. So it was kind of like that building of suspense. But that was the bulk. There was a couple sports themed ones. I have a football one. So, again, you can kind of even tell by the uniforms, this is look at the helmets. We're probably in the 30s or the 40s for this one. And this one, like, same thing. This does not guarantee everyone gets something, but was probably giving away candy, because if you punched out the little card that said touchdown, you got 20 pieces. If you did offsides, you got 1 piece. So that one, considering I don't care about sports, I did like that one. And this one's for Vinny. They did start doing shapes. So they're not common. I really only have 2. So I've got a die cut one that's curved, and this one you can tell by the brightness of the graphics is probably a little bit later. But this one's definitely earlier. So you've got your pinup covered by the 26 girl undercover, and she's got her little feet and everything on there. She's fairly thickly made, board's fairly thick. I wouldn't consider this a hidden one, because I think you're going to know what this is. She's
right on the front.
So I don't think she's necessarily considered. I wouldn't put her in that category, but she does have a cover, but it's promoting the 26 girl undercover. So when you open it up, you end up paying 25 cents. And then this is one of those where the prize money is given in trade books goods. So this was an idea that you didn't get the cash, you got it in trade. So you can see there's a jackpot section. So you could, if you got the right, as I said here, each of the above receives 1 punch in the jackpot. So the little piece of paper would have all these fruits on there, and you were trying to match it. So it was making the same idea behind a trade stimulator, is making it interactive. It was trying to get people to stick around at the bar, play something, check, do your scratch off, whatever. These were just free scratch off. So she's not the greatest condition. She's got a couple little, dings and stuff along her edges, but I thought she was pretty cool. So she was definitely one I wanted to pick up, and she'll be a fun one to be able to display.
She is awesome. Now, for all of the people watching, I'm sure there's someone that is going to want to start a collection of these. So what do you recommend people do when they go on eBay? What are the best key terms to type in to find some of these?
So the biggest thing to check for, what you're going to find that they're universally referred to as is punch board, but you probably want to put in both punch board as 1 word and also try it punch board as 2 words. In some cases, they will be still marked as trade stimulators, because there is a big advertising community, or a big community that's big into that advertising section of the trade stimulators. Most of these, unfortunately, they'll call them trade stimulators, but they're not. If someone calls it and they're recognizing trade stimulator, you're probably going to pay more money. It may be worth it, but in those cases, it's one of those, they know what they have. So if they've gone through the trouble of actually calling it a trade stimulator, you're probably not going to get, quote unquote, a deal. Punch board, and go ahead and look for punch cards, although those, it's not as common. Punch and board, I just do it as 1 word versus 2. You will get probably 90% of what's available. You can search by the manufacturer. I have found, a Charles A. Brewer. It's listed as Chas A. Brewer, CHAS. Chas A. Brewer is the way the company was made. You can sometimes find them listed, but again, most of them, if you search for Hamilton, if you search for some of the other names, they don't come up that much because they're not really tracked all that often. So people are doing the simplest, and punch board is by far the most common. There are tons of them available. They are not rare, but in some cases you will find, probably $5 to $10 for the smaller ones, but they are easily, you'll find them over $50 to $75 is not uncommon. Look at the sold comps. You'll find a whole bunch that have really low sold comps, thanks to me. But you can get an idea of what's out there, and really just start. What I'm starting to do, and this is kind of, I built this up, but now what I'm starting to do is refine. I could just build and build and build and build and build, but I'm not going to have that many shelves. So what I'm trying to focus on, because I'm the huckster, trusty, but I'm a huckster, I'm trying to find the trade stimulator ones. What I really like are the no loser ones, like the idea that you would be guaranteed something. Those are the ones I really like. Those are very hard to find, not because they're expensive or anything. It's just that they didn't make them for that long. They really started transitioning into the gambling aspect, and so they went away. So like even this one, you're still, not everyone was guaranteed a piece of the peanut brittle. So I do like them pre-printed. I think this is quaint that it has writing on it, but I would much prefer the pre-printed ones. But that's what you can find a specialty, whether it's the manufacturer, whether it's the style. There's a whole subculture of put and take, and the graphics on some of these are beautiful. all different kinds that you can do, sports themes, pinup themes. You know, you can find the exact same board with all, 25 different pinups on it. Find a category that you really like, and that's what you should try and buy.
Well, the graphics on these, Patrick, are absolutely amazing. The history to them is fascinating, and what a collection you have there. I'm just so amazed at listening and learning about all of this. I'm sure all of our viewers are as well. I see lots of great comments in the chat.
It's a little embarrassing that I built it up this quickly. It's just like, so now I get to refine. So some of these may end up in a live sale at some point, but for now, I've got my collection, and it's a fun collection to build. I wore my Katie hat, and I decided I have a pin that I put in it. I didn't have a gambling pin, but I had a clown pin. So I thought it's like kind of fun, kind of games, entertainment. That was my pin for tonight.
I love that, Patrick. And in honor of the punch boards and the gambling, I wore my Trifari playing card brooch for Patrick tonight. So that's fun. These are the ones that I found recently, and they're the little punch style. So I will send
pay what you punch.
Patrick. So these are very cool. Now, this one's not actually from Chicago, which is interesting.
Okay. Yep.
So awesome. Well, thank you, Patrick, so much for your time tonight. What else do you have going on coming up on your channel?
On my channel, I will have my sale tomorrow night. So I have my standard Thursday night Trusty's Vintage Live sale on the Trusty Huckster Mercantile channel at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that will be tomorrow night. And hopefully you'll be able to join me, and I'll have Nate in the chat along with me. And then I look forward to being on your channel again on Sunday, when we do another edition of Tales from the Triptych, which you are hosting. And so I will participate in that vicariously while I'm watching you drive. And why don't you tell people what what the topic is?
Yes, I'm very excited about our next show, Tales from the Triptych, this Sunday. And I'm going to be talking all about Petroliana, and more specifically, vintage oil cans. So if you love cool graphics like you saw tonight, come back to see some more awesome vintage on Tales from the Triptych and learn about Petroliana and oil cans.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much I'm glad we're doing this. So next week, we will have a guest, and we will start doing these as duo dives now every Wednesday. So next week, it'll switch to my channel. I won't always just go back and forth. It just depends on who we're hosting. But I will host on my channel next week, this same time, for the next duo dive. And don't you have a vinyl video coming up Friday?
Yes, that's right. On Friday, I've got a vinyl video coming out about one of my most recent vinyl finds, which is very exciting. So you can catch that at 7 p.m. on Friday. It will be scheduled and ready to go. So thank you, Patrick, for coming on and tuning in and being part of this. This was so fun.
Thanks. I'm glad this worked out. I'm really excited to share the collection because I built it so quickly. Now I get to try and enjoy it. So it was fun kind of like laying it out to decide, hey, how do I want to display it, and talking about what I got.
Absolutely. And lots of great information tonight. If you're coming in late, you can always watch the replay. It will be up. Stay tuned for our upcoming shows and events. Always follow us on Instagram so you know what's coming up. And of course, Patrick's channel is linked down below. So if you're not subscribed to Patrick, definitely go subscribe. He's got great content. And I hope, as always, folks, you will stay in, stay safe, and veg YouTube. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody.